This is the Horten Ho-229 jet fighter bomber. It was intended to be one of Germany's superweapons.
Uncover the incredible tale of how advanced quantum AI reconstructed the long-lost blueprints of one of World War II's most mysterious aircraft, the Horten Ho 229. After decades of speculation and scattered evidence, groundbreaking discoveries have emerged, redefining both history and engineering. What secrets have been hiding in plain sight for nearly 80 years? Dive in to explore revelations that stunned experts and could have altered the very path of aviation and warfare. The fragments that remained. History has a strange way of keeping secrets. It loves to tell half a story, then leaves the rest scattered for historians, archaeologists, and scientists to chase for decades. Sometimes those missing pieces never show up at all, but that's starting to change. With the rise of artificial intelligence, we're not just finding lost fragments. We're uncovering details no one even knew were missing. And that's exactly what happened here. It started with fragments, splinters of wood, torn blueprints, and rumors buried under decades of dust. The Horten Ho 229, sometimes called the H-9 or simply the Flying Wing, was a ghost of an aircraft that refused to die. Conceived by brothers Reimar and Walter Horten, it wasn't just another German warplane. It was a leap into the future. Sleek, tailless, and eerily smooth, it looked less like a World War II jet and more like something reverse-engineered from a UFO sighting, and yet it was real. The brothers were chasing Hitler's so-called 3 × 1000 dream, an aircraft that could fly 1,000 kilometers per hour, reach 1,000 kilometers in range, and carry 1,000 kilograms of bombs. But the Hortens believed they could bend physics to their will. When the war ended, chaos scattered their work. Blueprints burned in bombed-out factories. Test data vanished. Witnesses contradicted one another. Even their surviving prototype, the Ho 229 V3, was missing key components, like a jigsaw puzzle with half its pieces gone. Today, that same ghost sits quietly inside the Stephen F. Udvar Hazy Center. Among the legends of aviation, it's incomplete. American troops captured the V3 prototype in April 1945 at a factory in Gotha, Germany. It never flew, it never fired a shot. But it did spark decades of fascination and mystery. The aircraft was shipped to the United States for study and then quietly stored away. What the engineers couldn't know at the time was that much of its brilliance, its potential, was literally missing. The original blueprints were incomplete. Many sections contradicted one another. Measurements that didn't match, components that couldn't physically fit. Some parts existed only as sketches on the back of envelopes. Entire aerodynamic calculations were rumored to have been buried with Reimar Horten himself. The Smithsonian Preservation Team cataloged every surviving rivet, every adhesive layer, every microscopic crack. Still, basic questions went unanswered. Why did the aircraft use dark resin glue between its wooden layers? Why was its weight distributed so oddly? And what exactly was the purpose of those strange curves near the engine mounts? Even Northrop Grumman, yes, the modern stealth aircraft manufacturer, got involved in 2008. They built a full-scale replica using 1940s materials and tested it for radar reflectivity. The result? The Ho 229's radar cross-section was 20% smaller than any other World War II aircraft. That's stealth. Before stealth was even a word. So was this deliberate engineering genius or just lucky design? No one knew. And for decades, no one could prove it. Traditional historians tried everything. Engineers compared fragments. Physicists simulated airflow. Modelers built replicas. Every attempt hit the same dead end. Too many gaps. Too many contradictions. Then came a wild idea. What if artificial intelligence could fill in the blanks? Enter quantum AI reconstruction, a system that doesn't think in straight lines like we do. Instead of testing one solution at a time, it maps millions of probabilities simultaneously. It can take fragments, contradictions, and missing data and infer what must have been there. The project began quietly. Aerospace engineers, data scientists, and historians formed a collaboration to see if quantum AI could do what human logic had failed to: rebuild the Ho 229 from scratch. They fed it everything, every photograph, every measurement, every line of half-faded blueprints. They even input wind tunnel data from the V2 test flights, the only prototype that ever flew before it crashed. The AI didn't just analyze numbers, it learned the mindset of the Horten brothers. It studied 1940s aerodynamics, wartime materials, factory tolerances, and the glider experiments that inspired the design. It was as if the machine had stepped back into 1944, into the minds of two visionaries working under impossible pressure. First, it built a 3D digital skeleton of the surviving V3 using photogrammetry. Every rivet, every dent, every curve scanned to microscopic precision. Then it cross-referenced that geometry with flight data and aerodynamic equations. It ran millions of design iterations, testing structural integrity, airflow efficiency, and fuel distribution, all at once. Traditional computers would have taken years. The quantum-inspired algorithms did it in weeks. One by one, the missing pieces began to reappear. Structural ribs aligned perfectly. Air intake channels matched thermal limits of the Jumo 004 turbojets. And then, after 18 months of analysis, something extraordinary happened. The quantum system produced complete digital blueprints. Every component, every system, every structural member rebuilt from fragmented memory and mathematical logic. For the first time since 1945, the Ho 229 existed again. But could this AI-built aircraft actually fly? That question sparked a storm. Engineers rolled their eyes. Historians scoffed. AI is clever, sure, but it's also known to hallucinate, to create elegant nonsense that looks perfect until it falls apart in practice. So validation began. For the first time, the world saw a hint of what the Horten Ho 229 was truly meant to be, and yet this was only the beginning. The Horten brothers' obsession. To them, the perfect aircraft wasn't one that flew well, it was one that became the sky itself. Their vision? A seamless wing. No tail, no fuselage, no drag, just pure aerodynamic grace. A single surface slicing through the air like a blade through silk. That obsession consumed them, and decades later, it's what the AI would rediscover. Proof that genius, even when buried under 80 years of dust, never really dies. During the early 1930s, while others were tinkering with propellers and heavy airframes, the Horten brothers were sketching elegant bird-like shapes in their notebooks. Gliders came first, quiet experiments in lift, balance, and symmetry. But the brothers wanted more. They wanted power. By the time World War II rolled in, their designs had evolved into something extraordinary, a jet-powered flying wing that looked like it had fallen from another planet. Hitler's air ministry had issued his challenge, and the brothers took it personally. They built variant after variant, refining their vision like painters experimenting with new brushstrokes, each version bringing them closer to perfection. The H9V1 came first, a simple, unpowered glider that silently proved their radical concept could truly fly. It was elegance stripped to its essence, a wing that defied conventional design and soared purely on lift and balance. Then came the H9V2, powered by twin Junkers Jumo 004B jet engines. When it took to the air, witnesses were stunned. The sleek, tailless machine didn't just fly, it sliced through the sky, a living symbol of how far the brothers' obsession had come. But the Ho 229 V3 never got its chance. Captured incomplete as the war collapsed, it was shipped across the Atlantic, its promise suspended in time. There were more versions on paper, V4 through V6, each more ambitious than the last. Two-seaters, night fighters, even production-ready models that never left the factory floor. Each one carried a hint of what might have been. For decades, those hints were all anyone had. But when quantum AI entered the picture, something remarkable happened. It started connecting dots that human researchers had never been able to align. Within weeks, it rebuilt the Ho 229 from fragments, blueprints, test data, photos, even contradictory witness reports, and produced a digital model that stunned aviation historians. The reconstruction revealed something nobody expected: engineering logic far ahead of its time. Load paths perfectly aligned with stress lines like muscle fibers in a living creature. Engines buried deep in the wing for reduced drag and radar reflection. Even stealth shaping, decades before stealth was a word anyone used. Scaled models built by the Technical University of Munich matched the 1945 flight data with eerie precision. It wasn't random. The AI hadn't just guessed, it had rediscovered intent. And then came the mysteries. Those engines, two Junkers Jumo 004s, had always puzzled engineers. Mount them too far back and the aircraft becomes unstable. Too far forward and it loses lift. The AI's reconstruction suggested an ingenious compromise: The engines were partially shrouded by the trailing edge of the wing. This reduced both drag and radar visibility, a trick modern stealth aircraft use routinely, but which no one believed the Hortens could have conceived back then. Then came the so-called charcoal glue. For years, Reimar Horten had claimed he mixed powdered charcoal into the resin that held the plywood together, supposedly to absorb radar. Many dismissed it as post-war storytelling, but the AI wasn't so sure. It mapped adhesive traces across the airframe and found they aligned precisely with the aircraft's predicted radar hotspots. Coincidence? Probably not. To confirm it, researchers later found a 1944 Gotha factory memo describing special surface treatments almost identical to what the AI predicted. The deeper the AI looked, the more the brothers' brilliance came into focus. Even the aircraft's speed myths got a reality check. The Ho 229 was rumored to hit 1,000 kilometers per hour, an insane feat for 1945. The AI simulations put it closer to 950 kilometers per hour at sea level, but in thinner air at altitude, the dream number was actually within reach. The brothers hadn't been exaggerating. They were just ahead of their materials and time. What fascinated modern engineers most wasn't the performance. It was the philosophy encoded in the design. Every surface, every curve had purpose. Control surfaces subtly twisted along the wings to balance airflow. Mass distribution was deliberate, almost sculptural. The AI even identified reinforcement points that didn't make sense until it realized they were placeholders for future upgrades. Stronger engines, heavier weapons. The brothers weren't building just one plane, they were building a platform for evolution. And that's when the question emerged. What if history had unfolded just slightly differently? If the war had lasted another 6 months? If the brothers had one more prototype? Could the world's first stealth jet have changed everything? The timeline of what almost was. On February 2, 1945, German test pilot Erwin Ziller took the Horten Ho 229 V2 on its maiden-powered flight. Against all odds, it worked. The jet, a flying wing that looked nothing like anything else in the sky, handled beautifully. Ziller reported smooth control, stable turns, and a level of aerodynamic efficiency no one expected from such a radical design. For a brief moment, the impossible seemed to work. 2 weeks later, he climbed into the cockpit for his third flight. The skies were clear, the engines roared, everything looked perfect, until it wasn't. As he came into land, one of the Junker's Jumo 004 engines flamed out. Ziller tried to compensate, pushing the other to full power, attempting to circle around for another try. But on one engine, the Ho 229 couldn't maintain control. The jet rolled, stalled, and slammed into the ground. Ziller was killed instantly. That single engine failure, just one unlucky mechanical hiccup, silenced the most advanced aircraft of its time. 3 months later, Germany surrendered. The Horten Ho 229 project, unfinished and misunderstood, was swept into the ruins of a collapsing Reich. But what if Ziller had landed safely that day? When quantum AI reconstructed the full blueprints, it didn't just restore the aircraft, it mapped out the timeline that could have been. The data revealed a chillingly plausible alternative history. According to the AI's projections, if the V2 had completed its test flights successfully, the nearly finished V3 prototype could have been airborne by late March 1945. Production approval might have followed immediately, likely in April, and by June 1945, just 2 months after Germany's actual surrender, operational squadrons of Ho 229s could have taken to the skies. Now imagine this alternate June. The Allies are advancing on all fronts. The skies over Europe are thick with B-17s and Lancasters. Then, from nowhere, something fast, silent, and nearly invisible streaks through the bomber formations. Radar operators can't lock onto it, pilots can't catch it, and before anyone can react, bombs drop on Allied airfields in France and fuel depots in Belgium. It wouldn't have saved Germany, not even close, but it could have made the final months far bloodier. Allied bombers would have faced losses high enough to slow operations, forcing new tactics, and possibly delaying the war's end. One single flight gone differently, one engine not flaming out, and the skies over Europe might have looked very different. But the AI's timeline didn't stop there. It kept estimating. If production had begun in 1945, evolutionary variants were inevitable. The Horten brothers had already sketched out pressurized cockpits, night fighter models, and reconnaissance versions. Some blueprints even hinted at swept-wing adaptations that could have led towards supersonic flight, concepts that wouldn't reach reality until decades later. By 1946 or 7, the AI suggested, a mature Ho 229 fleet could have existed, faster, more stable, perhaps even radar-absorbing in a meaningful way. After the war, American, British, and Soviet engineers all studied captured Horten documents. The flying wing concept re-emerged in the Northrop YB-49, and decades later in the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber. The echoes of the Ho 229 can still be seen in every stealth aircraft that followed. The AI also dared to rewind the clock even further. What if, it asked, the Horten brothers had received full backing earlier, say in 1942 instead of 43? The results were unnerving. With just 1 year's head start and proper funding, Germany could have deployed operational flying wings by mid-1944, right in the middle of the Allied bombing campaigns. It wouldn't have changed the inevitable outcome. The war was still unwinnable, but it might have changed the price. Thousands more could have died. The war could have dragged on months longer, all because of a machine that, for one brief moment, actually worked. Evidence that changed everything. The moment of truth came on October 2024, when a quiet auditorium filled with some of the brightest minds in aerospace, history, and engineering. It wasn't just another academic gathering. This was the day the Horten Ho 229 would be reborn through quantum AI reconstruction. Everything checked out. The reconstructed aircraft wasn't just a plausible design, it was airworthy. The audience nodded politely, impressed but not yet astonished. Then came the moment. The AI team zoomed in on a section of the surviving V3 prototype, a fragment of wing skin preserved for decades. Using ultra-high-resolution scans, the AI had mapped the microscopic variations in the metal's thickness. These weren't random manufacturing errors, they formed an intentional pattern. Across the wingspan, the metal subtly thickened and thinned in precise geometric sequences. The AI ran a comparative model and revealed the truth. Those patterns mirrored topology optimization, an engineering method that minimizes material use while maximizing strength. The crowd went silent. This wasn't just clever design. It was decades ahead of its time. What the AI found next deepened the shock. Through electromagnetic analysis, it uncovered a subtle logic behind the Horten's outer skin. The panel edges weren't just random seams, they were strategically angled to scatter radar waves. Certain materials were deliberately positioned to absorb electromagnetic energy, and fine surface discontinuities disrupted radar reflection. It was a primitive stealth strategy. One of the attending experts summed it up perfectly. This isn't a coincidence, it's systematic. They were doing stealth 40 years early. By this point, people weren't just taking notes, they were rethinking the timeline of modern aviation. Then came the flight simulation. The team had used the AI's complete reconstruction to create a hyper-realistic flight model, integrating every known parameter, from aerodynamics to pilot feedback. Experienced test pilots were invited to fly it in a full-motion simulator. They compared their experiences with Erwin Ziller's 1945 flight logs. The results were uncanny. Handling characteristics, stability, even stall behavior, all matched. The reconstructed Horten didn't just look right, it flew right. But the AI didn't stop there. It went deeper, reverse engineering the brothers' entire design philosophy. The algorithm showed how one decision influenced the next. Structural efficiency shaped aerodynamic curves. Those curves altered radar signatures. The radar profile informed material placement. Everything connected. A former museum director stood during the question and answer session and said what everyone was thinking, that they have been looking at this aircraft wrong for 80 years. It wasn't a desperate last-ditch weapon, it was a glimpse into the future. But the revelations didn't end there. One final slide from the AI's reconstruction caused outright disbelief. It suggested that the Ho 229's design could scale, that by simply enlarging the frame by 50%, the aircraft could have become a long-range jet-powered bomber. Essentially, the AI had drawn up a 1940s version of the B-2 Spirit, sleek, stealthy, and capable of crossing oceans. The concept sent ripples through the room. Was this proof that the Hortens had glimpsed the future of flight? Or was the AI overinterpreting patterns that weren't really there? Debate erupted. Engineers argued about manufacturing limits. Historians questioned the validity of post-war data. One scientist asked the question that lingered long after the symposium ended. If this is true, then how much of our modern technology is really ours? The renewed investigation. It started with a discovery in a small German archive in Bonn. A set of Reimar Horten's notebooks, long dismissed as mathematical doodles, were reanalyzed by a young research team from Delft. What they found sent a jolt through the academic community. Early radar cross-section equations, dated 1944. That's right, nearly half a century before the military world figured it out, one of the Horten brothers was already trying to calculate how radar waves interacted with curved aircraft surfaces. The handwriting was unmistakable. The math was legitimate. Suddenly, the AI's claims didn't look so far-fetched. Then came another find, this time in the dusty production records of the Gottheimer Wagenfabrik, the company contracted to build the Horten jets. Tucked between dull budget reports and parts orders was a memo referencing specialized adhesive mixtures for composite lamination. The composition of that glue matched exactly what the AI model had predicted. An early resin composite meant to strengthen thin plywood structures while reducing radar reflection. Coincidence? Hardly. Every week, another fragment of evidence surfaced, confirming one improbable detail after another. A retired aviation historian from Munich put it best. He said that the quantum AI didn't just tell us a story. It told us what the evidence actually says, when you have the ability to process everything all at once. Something humans have never been able to do. He added that this capability marked a significant shift in how information is analyzed and interpreted. The AI's reconstruction even managed to solve a few long-standing aviation mysteries. For decades, engineers argued about the Horten Ho 229's center of gravity, a tiny but crucial detail that could determine whether the plane flew smoothly or spun out of control. The AI's analysis, cross-verified through simulations, and the surviving structural remains, finally settled the debate. The numbers fit perfectly. The original design was balanced to near perfection, and that's when the story began to shift, from historical curiosity to existential unease. Because if the Horten brothers really had engineered an aircraft this advanced, then our timeline of technological progress suddenly looked wrong. Was it possible that post-war engineers, American, British, or Soviet, had drawn from the captured Horten research far more deeply than they ever admitted? Or had the AI simply connected dots that looked meaningful but weren't? Regardless, one thing was certain: history had just been complicated. Meanwhile, research teams started asking an even bigger question. If AI could piece together a near-complete aircraft design from fragments scattered across decades, what else could it reconstruct? Lost ships? Collapsed civilizations? Ancient technologies misinterpreted for centuries? The implications were both thrilling and terrifying. The discovery was no longer about an old airplane. It was about the limits of human knowledge, and whether history had been quietly rewritten long before AI ever got involved. The results that left experts speechless. It began quietly just 3 weeks after the symposium, when the research team received a message from the United States National Archives. A new batch of documents, sealed since 1949, had finally been declassified. Nobody expected much, maybe some dusty interrogation notes, a few grainy photos. But what they opened instead would rewrite everything they thought they knew. Inside were intelligence reports from the chaotic final weeks of World War II, interrogation transcripts of Reimar and Walter Horten, along with technical assessments written by American engineers who had examined the Ho 229 V3 after its capture. Most of it was what you'd expect: measurements, sketches, confused notes scribbled in pencil. But then came a sentence that made the entire room go silent. Fragments of burned electronic components recovered from the internal wing cavity. Origin and function unknown. Buried in those reports was a mystery no one had followed up on for 80 years. American engineers had discovered a sealed compartment inside the Ho 229's wing, filled with melted circuitry. They photographed it, filed it, and then, like so many wartime secrets, it vanished into the fog of bureaucracy. The AI, it turned out, had already predicted that cavity's existence weeks before the documents surfaced. Based on the aircraft's power distribution and wiring layout, the model concluded that a missing subsystem had been installed, something that required more electricity than any navigation or communication gear of the era. And now, here it was, confirmed. When the team fed the 1945 photos into their simulation, the match was uncanny. The AI identified mounting holes, cable routes, and scorched fragments that aligned perfectly with a radar detection array it had hypothesized an early radar warning receiver operating on principles that wouldn't be formally developed until the 1950s. This wasn't random guesswork. The AI had reverse-engineered an entire system from subtle structural clues, and the United States engineers of 1945 had accidentally documented the proof. In essence, the Horten brothers had tried to give their aircraft something almost alive: the ability to sense enemy radar, evade detection, and strike from blind angles. It wasn't just stealth, it was electronic warfare before electronic warfare even existed. But as jaw-dropping as that was, it wasn't the final revelation. Hidden within the V3's structure were ghost design cues, extra hardpoints, unused reinforcements, strange weight distributions. At first, these seemed inefficient, but when the AI projected them forward through the next 2 or 3 theoretical versions, everything suddenly made sense. Those mistakes were future-proofing, space and strength built in for systems that hadn't even been invented yet. It was as if the Horten brothers had planted technological seeds, expecting them to bloom decades later. One aerospace engineer, after reviewing the findings for 3 sleepless days, put it bluntly, saying that they weren't building an aircraft, they were building a platform. That statement hit like thunder, because that's exactly how modern fighter programs, like the F-35 Lightning II, are designed today. Not as single-use machines, but as modular systems meant to evolve through upgrades and tech integration for decades. Yet the Hortens had done it in 1944. By the time the AI finished its reconstruction, experts were no longer arguing about feasibility, they were questioning reality. How could 2 brothers working in wartime scarcity, under bombing raids and fuel shortages, think this far ahead? Some speculated they were simply geniuses. Others suggested they were dreamers, obsessed with perfect aerodynamic purity, unaware that their artistic designs were years beyond the world's technology curve. But there was a darker interpretation too, that the Hortens knew exactly what they were doing, that they understood flight not just as engineering, but as an evolutionary path, one humanity wasn't ready to follow yet. In the final segment of the declassified material, a note from an American engineer stood out. If developed further, this machine would have represented a paradigm shift in air warfare. A paradigm shift. That's a polite way of saying it could have changed everything. And perhaps the most haunting part? The AI's analysis hinted, quietly, almost as an afterthought, that a follow-up design, codenamed V7, existed in outline form somewhere in the archives. A larger, faster, smarter aircraft, designed for speeds approaching the sound barrier, built for missions across continents. No one has found those blueprints yet, but the AI insists they're real. Elixir of aircraft problems. Just when everyone thought the story had reached its peak, the quantum AI had one more trick up its sleeve. Its final simulations didn't just validate the Horten Ho 229's stealth design, they revealed something far stranger. Hidden within those elegant flying wing curves were answers to problems the aviation world wouldn't even know it had for another 20 years. Take compressor stall, for example, the jet engine's worst nightmare. Engineers in the 1950s wrestled with it endlessly. But the Ho 229, it had already beaten it. The intake geometry, the subtle curvature of the ducting, even the way the air diffused before reaching the turbines. It all pointed to a sophisticated understanding of airflow management. In short, the Horten brothers had built natural boundary layer control into their jet decades before the science behind it was formalized. And transonic shock? Another puzzle that haunted early jet designers. When aircraft push close to the speed of sound, shockwaves crawl unpredictably across the wings, throwing control surfaces into chaos. Yet the AI's flight simulation showed that the Ho 229's wing profile anticipated this perfectly, shifting load paths, maintaining control authority even as shock fronts danced along its skin. It was almost as if the aircraft could feel the air, bending around it instead of fighting against it. The AI ran thousands of virtual flight tests, throwing every possible weather condition, altitude, and angle of attack at the design. The result? Stability, efficiency, elegance, every time. But the true jaw-dropper came when the AI modeled the Ho 229 in simulated combat. Using reconstructed specifications, it placed a squadron of them against Allied bomber formations over 1945 Europe. The outcomes varied, but one terrifying constant remained. Traditional defenses simply couldn't cope. The Ho 229 was too fast for piston engine interceptors, too stealthy for early radar to reliably detect, and agile enough to strike and vanish before anyone knew what had happened. In the AI's virtual skies, the war tilted alarmingly toward the impossible. Then came the discovery that changed everything. Following the AI's breadcrumb trail of archival references, a researcher at the German Federal Archives stumbled upon a sealed folder dated April 1945. Inside, an authorization memo signed by Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister. Amid a list of desperate last-minute production orders was a single chilling line. Horten Project, 200 units authorized for immediate production. April 10, 1945. Just 3 weeks before Germany's surrender, the order was never fulfilled. Factories were overrun before the first unit could roll out. But the intent was clear. Even in the chaos of collapse, the Nazi high command had seen the Ho 229 as a potential savior, a weapon so advanced it might change the course of the war. When the memo appeared on the symposium screen, the room fell utterly silent. For a full minute, no one spoke. It wasn't admiration they felt, it was dread. The AI hadn't rebuilt fantasy, it had rebuilt near reality. The revelation was haunting. Humanity had come within weeks of unleashing an aircraft that blended stealth, speed, and radar evasion in one seamless machine. A ghost of innovation born from the darkest chapter in history. And now, thanks to quantum AI, that ghost had a face again. Today, the restored blueprints of the Ho 229 exist as a fully digitized archive, available for study, debate, and inevitably controversy. But it raises a haunting question. Should an aircraft born from one of history's darkest eras ever be brought back to life? What's your take on this? Share your perspective in the comments section. Thanks for watching. See you in our next video.